Tonight, Starmer insists he's completely in control. With questions around the Prime Minister's gifts and hospitality and his Chief of Staff still swirling, he says he's focusing on delivering for the people. Also tonight, as Reform UK's party conference kicks off in Birmingham tomorrow, Nigel Farage announces he's giving up his ownership of the party. So, does this mean the Farage show is over? I'll be joined live by the Deputy Leader, Richard Tice. Plus, Kwasi Kwarteng will be with me to talk interest rates, the economy and the state of the Conservative Party as it looks for a new leader. And we'll look at when political advisers find themselves pushed from out of the shadows and into the media spotlight. All that and more with Josh Simons and Gutu Hari, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, all of that to come on the programme, but first, the latest political reaction here in Westminster to the ongoing crisis in Lebanon that's escalated really significantly in the last 48 hours. And tonight, the Foreign Secretary issued a warning to British nationals in the area. Well, Ali Fortescue is at the Foreign Office for us this evening. Ali, what can you tell us?
Well, Sophie, I mean, it does feel like we're seeing a new front in this unrest opening up. Last night we heard from Number 10. They said that they wanted things to de-escalate. They were monitoring the situation carefully, but that doesn't feel like that's what's happened in the last 24 hours. We've seen fresh airstrikes. We've heard from the leader of Hezbollah who blames Israel. In his words, he said this could be called a declaration of war. Israel crossed all the red lines. We haven't directly heard from Israel yet on the attack, Sophie, but the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, have said that this was designed to degrade Hezbollah's terrorist capabilities. So what have we heard from politicians here in the UK? Well, David Lammy has been in Paris with Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, and other figures from around the world. They've been having a diplomatic dinner. Of course, this has been on the agenda. He said in a tweet, I spoke with Najib Mikati, the Lebanese Prime Minister, that is, and expressed my deep concern over rising tensions and civilian casualties in Lebanon. We discussed the need for a negotiated solution to restore stability and security across the blue line. My message, he says, to British nationals in Lebanon is leave while commercial options remain. Tensions are high and the situation could deteriorate rapidly. So they're urging, David Lammy, British nationals in Lebanon to leave while commercial options still remain. Again, saying that a negotiated solution to restore stability and security across the blue line is the priority, echoing a call we heard too from Antony Blinken calling for restraint. I should say the Lebanese Prime Minister has called on the UN to take a firm stance, and the UN Security Council will be meeting to discuss this tomorrow.
Ali, thank you very much indeed. Ali Fortescue there for us outside the Home Office, the Foreign Office, I should say. Ali, right, on to the rest of the programme and domestic politics here in the UK. And the question many are asking, is there even such a thing as a political honeymoon anymore? Keir Starmer's been propelled to Number 10 with a historic majority. In the first few weeks, he's done a deal with junior doctors. He's managed to get some tricky legislation comfortably through Parliament. And yet he's struggling to shake off the narrative around gifts and hospitality he's accepted. He's also faced a barrage of leaks about his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, oh, this is all nonsense. You know, the taxpayer's not paying for his Arsenal tickets, and who really cares if Sue Gray's paid more than the Prime Minister? What were all you journalists on anyway? But I guess the point that I do want to make is this. Someone in Number 10, or close to Number 10, is leaking stories to cause maximum damage to the PM's most senior staff member. And this isn't happening a couple of years into Keir Starmer's premiership. It's happening a couple of months in. It's really soon. And yes, it's important to put it into context. It's not exactly going to bring down a government or, thwart the legislative programme. Let's not get too carried away. But still, it does point to a level of dysfunction in the political operation. And it is something that Number 10 will be desperate to get a grip on. We'll be exploring some of those questions on the programme this evening. And first, let's talk now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who joins me now. Sam, you've really done a lot of the running on this story with your kind of Westminster Accounts project. What can you tell us today?
Well, I've talked to an awful lot of people in the last 36 hours, and there are mixed views about whether or not the freebies matter, whether or not the salary of Sue Gray matters, as you say. But there is one consistent message, which is that from cabinet ministers to the most loyal of MPs, they are all saying Number 10 just needs to get a grip. There is a sort of vacuum left in the way this government is trying to communicate. Days without it being clear what they're trying to achieve, and days where unforced errors are being made, announcements going a bit wrong, or justifications for why the government's doing things not really landing or confusing even their closest supporters. Just look this week with the freebies story. Every day there seemed to be a different message from a government minister or a backbench MP on the telly in the morning. And the government's most loyal supporters want this to stop. Now, nobody has a standout plan. Some predict an early end to Sue Gray's tenure as Chief of Staff, but probably more likely, I think, is a call to bolster the operation in Number 10 with more people who understand politics. Maybe that defeated former shadow cabinet figure, Jonathan Ashworth, or somebody like that, bringing them in to just take a closer look at what's going on and stop the unforced errors. I think the issue that worries some is Keir Starmer just a bit too stubborn? We saw that stubbornness yesterday when we were talking about the way he talks about he's almost right to go to football matches. And then today, there seems just that hint of stubbornness in the way he says everything is fine. Listen to this.
With all these briefings against you, are you the one that's in control here?
Look, I've got a team here at Number 10 and around the cabinet table who are utterly determined and focused on the change that we were elected to bring about.
But clearly there are people who are very unhappy within your team, and I'm wondering whether you've got a grip on that and whether you're the one in control here.
I'm completely in control and focused.
I mean, I think it will be for viewers to make up their mind whether they think the last few days have been a model of grip and control. There's a massive test starting in 36 hours. We are just on the cusp of Labour Party conference in Liverpool. That is a moment where the intensity, the focus on Keir Starmer and his operation goes up, not one gear, but several. And he has to survive that and come out looking good. Otherwise, it's going to be big pressure to make changes.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, we can hear now a bit of reaction that we've been getting to this story now from Leigh-on-Sea in Essex. The town's part of a constituency that has been Conservative since its creation in the 1950s until Labour narrowly won it at July's general election. Let's take a listen.
He kind of comes across as a man of the people, doesn't he? His dad was a tool maker and his mum, we got that constantly before the election, didn't we? And here he is accepting £100,000 is a lot of money in anybody's book, isn't it? So perhaps it was unwise of him to accept all of that, I would say.
Disappointed, I'm disgusted. It is just disgusting. So what else can you say?
Single parents out there needing money, benefits, the NHS, where he's getting 100 grand on supplements in regards to possibly sending his children to watch Taylor Swift concerts or a big football match down Wembley or Arsenal versus Tottenham last week, then how can we be justifying that?
Well, there's been very little public comment from serving Labour figures, unless they were already scheduled to face the media. But the former deputy leader of the Labour Party, Harriet Harman, gave this reaction, speaking with our political editor, Beth Rigby, on the Electoral Dysfunction podcast.
You can either double down on it and try and justify it, or you can just say, it was probably a misstep. If I had my time again, I wouldn't do it. And therefore, I don't know, I'm going to auction it for charity or something. And it was just a misstep. I mean, it's not a hanging offence, but I think doubling down and trying to justify it is, for some of the reasons that Ruth said, making things worse. He's not, a sort of money-focused, greedy type of person. He is a person of public service. So this is kind of slightly out of line, and he'll be wanting to deal with it.
I think the struggle is, this isn't just one thing. The whole of free gear Keir trending stuff is because he took literally the highest number of freebies, the highest value amount of 650 people in the House of Commons. Like, this wasn't this, like, he got some guy to buy him a suit before he went to the G7 and his wife got a frock. It's that he did it again and again and again. So he may not be the sort of person that wants to be seen as grasping, and he may not even think of himself as that. But it's the layer upon layer of rock here that kind of buries him. It's not just he did one thing.
I don't think he should do sackcloth and ashes. I think that's, overdoing it. He just needs to say, right, with hindsight, I'm going to do things differently. This is how I'm going to do it in future. And everybody will then move on to the things that really they care about.
And you can catch up with electoral dysfunction by scanning the QR code on your screen now. There's a new episode out tomorrow. And of course, the story about Keir Starmer and gifts and hospitality, sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Sophy Ridge and the former Conservative Special Advisor Sam Shah. Now, there might be a celebratory mood among Reform supporters as they gather for the party's first conference since making a breakthrough at the general election. Today, Nigel Farage set out some pretty radical plans to reorganise the party, even as he got embroiled in a row about his safety in his constituency. Let's just remind ourselves, shall we, of what has happened with Reform in recent months. Because, look, this is the vote they won in the 2024 general election, 14.3% of the vote. Now, that is the third highest of any political party, so very good performance there by Reform. But it only transformed to 5 MPs. There they all are. So that is the most that Reform has ever had. But, of course, with that vote share, you may have expected to have more. Now, they include the party's leader, Nigel Farage, familiar face, the former Conservative MP, Lee Anderson, and the party's deputy leader, Richard Tice, who I'm going to be speaking to very shortly. Now, since the election, Nigel Farage has drawn criticism for comments that he made following the Southport attack over the summer, when he questioned whether the truth was being withheld. While in Parliament, Reform MPs have notably missed out on securing any places on select committees as well, something they're not that happy about. Well, we can speak now to Reform's Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, who joins us now from his party conference in Birmingham. What was the main message you're trying to get across?
Good evening. Well, there's some very important messages that we will be getting across. Nigel's talked about taking the party to the next stage of professionalism and democratisation. We've got hundreds of branches being set up as we speak to get ready for the May county and unitary elections next year, and also changing the party's structure so that members have a greater say in the leadership of the party. These are all sort of natural evolutions as the party grows and matures, but also we'll be putting out a message of confidence and hope in the face of a country that, frankly, is pretty ill at ease at itself. I mean, the fact that I have to confirm to you this evening that the suit I'm wearing I've paid for myself, frankly, tells you a lot about the state of British politics. We've got a Prime Minister who has taken more freebies and hospitality and gifts than any other 600 of the 650 MPs in the last 5 years by a factor of 2. And we've got millions of pensioners, including over 22,000 in my constituency of Boston and Skegness, who are furious, who are worried about how they're going to heat their homes with higher energy bills, the removal of the heating allowance, the winter fuel allowance, despite the fact that train drivers and many other public sector workers are being given huge increases without any forms of performance-related productivity improvements.
What are you calling for then? Because, I mean, it is important to say, look, yeah, these are gifts, hospitality, not taxpayer funded. He has declared them in the correct way. There's no rules broken here. Do you think the rules should be changed?
But he literally stood on a platform of integrity and not having cronyism.
But my question is, should the rules be changed? Is that what you're asking for?
Look, declaring things is important, but if you're standing on a platform of not being subject to cronies, coming in and out of number 10, not being subject to let's say, indebtedness to people who've given you thousands of pounds worth of suits and frocks and free tickets to Taylor Swift concerts, to football matches, That's
it's a serious
cronyism.
point I'm asking.
That is,
If you're saying it's cronyism, then surely you would say that the rules should be changed. Is that what you're saying?
I think we've got to relook at this, because we've got a situation where confidence in the recently elected Prime Minister is collapsing because he stood on one platform and it turns out he's the biggest crony of all.
OK. Now, I want to talk to you about Nigel Farage's recent comments saying that he's not holding in-person surgeries in his constituency. He says it's because of security concerns. And look, you don't need me to tell you about how seriously security needs to be taken. We've seen that, obviously, in events in recent months. But I guess there is also a worry, isn't there, about whether you can really serve your constituents, if you're not meeting them in person. And many MPs are grappling with security concerns of their own as well. What would you say to people who, I guess, might be thinking, wow, this is just Nigel Farage not wanting to do the difficult work?
Not at all. The real key work, the casework for constituents, I get probably a couple of hundred emails a day, and many of those are from constituents who are concerned about important issues. They all get replies in a very timely fashion, and where we feel we can help, we try and help. That's the most important thing. I've done a number of surgeries, meeting lots of businesses. But look, he's probably equal with Boris Johnson, the most famous, in a sense, high-profile politician in this country. We saw during the election campaign essentially 2 attacks on him, and he has to be incredibly careful. And he's responding to, I'm sure, very well-considered security advice from the excellent parliamentary security services. And that's just a fact of life that we have to deal with. But the key work for constituents is the casework. And I'm quite sure that Nigel and his team will be doing that, like all of us Reform MPs, in an exemplary fashion.
Do you hold in-person constituency surgeries in your own constituency?
Yes, I do. I've had a number. I enjoy them.
To you?
They're valuable to me. But the simple fact of life is, I'm not considered a security, in a sense, risk in the same way that Nigel is. It's just a sad fact of life. But nevertheless, I've had advice from the security services, and it's a case of each individual MP has to respond to that as they feel appropriate for them.
I do have one other question for you before we wrap up. Do you agree with Nigel Farage that Donald Trump will be proven right about migrants eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio?
Oh, I'm not. Frankly, I've got much more important things to do, worrying about my constituents in Boston and Skegness, how to improve Boston, than worrying about cats and dogs in Ohio. That may be important in America. Over here, I'm focusing on Boston and Skegness. I'm focusing on the appalling start this Labour government has made. I'm focusing on 22,000 furious, anxious pensioners wondering how they're going to get through the winter.
Do you think Nigel Farage should be focusing on that then, rather than what's happening or not happening?
Nigel's a very busy, successful person, and he will focus on everything that he considers appropriate at the time. If you want something done, Sophie, give it to a busy, successful person. Much more likely to be done than not.
Thanks for the advice. Thank you very much. Richard Tice, thank you. Richard Tice there, speaking from his party's conference in Birmingham. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Labour MP, Josh Summons, and the former Number 10 Director of Communications, Gato Hari. Great to have you both on the programme. I want to talk to you about Keir Starmer's honeymoon. Gato, do you feel like, you've been in Number 10, you know what it's like, right? Do you feel that this is, a reality of what governing?
Part of it is, and I remember feeling frustrated when I was there, that there's so much focus on things that are ultimately trivial that you cannot talk about things like war in Europe, cost of living crisis, the challenges ahead, all of that. But, I learned the hard way, the trivial stuff really matters. And I think there's a difference as well. When you have been in power a long time and the sense of party discipline and unity of purpose has seeped away, then these things will happen. I am astonished, and it gives me no pleasure. I genuinely wish this government well. It gives me no pleasure to say it. But the way things have fallen apart, the briefings against the Chief of Staff, the hemorrhaging of news out of Number 10, the sort of appointments of many cronies, as it would be said by others. And then these two extraordinary things. Sue Gray lacking the self-awareness to know that if she had put a salary $3,000 lower, we wouldn't be talking about her at all, which is where you want to be as a chief of staff. But she has chosen, or allowed it to happen, that we're all talking about her. And Keir Starmer ending up not just with a few dodgy freebies, but top of the list of 650 MPs. That is extraordinary, really extraordinary. And it's sad to see that quick demise. And in that context, these things do matter because they stick. And we're still living in hard times. And I think I have no interest at all in football. But if you were to choose one thing that the average British bloke and a lot of British women would love to do more than anything else, it's going to the box at the football week in, week out, and actually going to Taylor Swift. And here he is soaking all that up, you know, and then saying, what's wrong with it?
What's your take, Josh?
Look, I'm one of 400 MPs recently and newly elected who, by the way, does hold in-person constituency surgeries, as every MP should, despite receiving advice. And I pay for my own suits. I wish I had more of them. And you know, I don't know what's going on in Number 10. I'm not party to the inner workings of it. I've never been inside Number 10. I don't know how it works. What I do know is that I want to be talking about the agenda, the things we have done, because I think it's in the things we have done that demonstrate the difference between this Prime Minister and this government and the last Prime Minister and the last government.
It's a distraction, you feel, basically.
Yeah, and we just need to get back to, you know, the idea that there's cronyism implies that the transparency, which is where all of this conversation comes from, you know, he's proactively sought transparency about that declaration, somehow implies there's undue influence. And, like, if you look at what's actually happening, we are bringing in the biggest change in the regulation of football in, you know, a generation. That's the exact opposite of undue influence. You know, we are standing on the side of the infected blood inquiry, you know, Horizon. Time and again, what we are in fact doing is standing on the side of people who are being, you know, badly treated by corporations, by the government and so on. And that is the story that we should be talking about because it's true, it's what we're doing.
One of the things I find quite astonishing, like you say, is the kind of leaking. I mean, someone is really someone's after Sue Gray, right? If you're a Number 10, what needs to happen now? Does there need to be, like, what, a leak inquiry? Do they need to get people together in the room? What's going on?
I can't exaggerate how crippling it is to be in a meeting wondering whether you can have an honest conversation when the decisions that need to be made require the most honest conversation. And you reach the point where you think, we cannot trust even the smaller circles. That really hampers the good operation of government. Now, that happened, I think, with the Conservatives because there had been years of tension and rifts and a collective breakdown and as I've said it here, sort of this propensity for self-harm. But at this stage in a new government, I have never seen this before, and it's extraordinary. And they're not just squabbling down in the weeds. They're going for the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. There are questions about the head of the civil service. There are questions about the Prime Minister himself, and it's not about wallpaper. It's about a whole load of things.
Do you agree with it? The leaking is an issue?
I don't know who's leaking what to whom. I just wish we weren't talking about this and we were talking about the things. I mean, I think in the end, you know, this is a story that matters, and it is, you know, integrity does matter. And the thing that sort of bugs me about it is that, you know, and I know some people will be watching this and will roll their eyes, but it is the truth. Keir Starmer is a man of integrity, and the last Prime Minister broke the law and got fined for it. Keir Starmer, you know, this whole story has originated because Keir Starmer proactively, you know, reached out to his team, the Parliamentary Commissioner of Standards, and said, look, I want to clarify the advice here. I want to check I've done the right thing. And then, you know, released the fact that he'd done that. And that is, you know, there is a huge contrast between somebody who is obeying the rules in such a way that they are proactively seeking to clarify what the rules are, and a Prime Minister who broke the law and got fined for it. And that contrast is really, really important.
OK, lots more from both of you throughout the programme. Josh and Gateau there. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. The Bank of England makes no moves on interest rates here, even as the United States and the EU start to bring them down. What does that say about the state of the UK economy? We'll hear from the former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
We're seeing an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
We're being crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back. Well, there was no relief yet for those hoping for a cut in the cost of borrowing after the Bank of England made its latest decision on interest rates today. Well, as economists had predicted, the rate was kept the same, it was stuck at 5%. The bank's decision was almost unanimous, with the Monetary Policy Committee voting 8-1 in favour of holding the rate steady at 5. It was kept on hold despite the US Federal Reserve last night cutting America's interest rates for the first time in more than 4 years. They cut it by 0.5 percentage points.
We've made a lot of progress. Inflation's come down a long way. And of course, we were able to cut rates in August. But our job is to make sure that inflation is sustainably at the 2% target. There are still some pressures. We've seen services inflation is still elevated. So I think we're now on a gradual path down. That's the good news. I think interest rates are going to come down. I'm optimistic on that front, but we do need to see some more evidence. And of course, we will be looking at this at every meeting.
Well, joining me now is the former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. Great
Hello.
to have you on
Good to
the
see you
programme. Bank of England holding interest rates, right decision?
I think that was expected. And the issue that they've got is that, of course, inflation isn't quite at the target level, the 2% that that's in their mandate. And it's at 2.2, I think. And so I think people expected that they wouldn't reduce rates. And they kept them at 5%. And
The question was what they should do, though, rather than what was expected.
I think holding them at this level was cautious, but probably on balance the right thing. Because what they don't want to do is to reduce rates sharply and then stoke up inflation again. So they're taking a very methodical and cautious approach.
I mean, you've been, I guess, a little bit critical, it's fair to say, of the Bank of England governor previously. I mean, there's many, particularly in the kind of Truss administration, who think that they were too slow to put interest rates up and then too slow to cut them.
I mean, there's that whole debate. I mean, I think that, what happened to me, what happened to Liz Truss, I think the government has got to put their hands up and say, look, we were partially responsible. But there's no doubt that they were quite slow in the course of 2022 to put up rates. And one of the things that essentially sort of derailed, among other things, the Truss government was that in America the Fed was putting up rates much quicker and much faster and much earlier than the Bank of England. And I think we held them very, very low. People forget it was 0.1% for much of the early part of this decade. and they pushed them up very quickly.
I guess it's interesting hearing your kind of thoughts on interest rates. Like some of our viewers, I'm sure, will be thinking,
yeah, you're the guy. Yeah, that's right.
You're the guy in crash the economy. Why should we be listening to what you have to say?
Of course they'll think that. But...
And I guess some of the leadership candidates as well. I was quite struck by Robert Jenrick describing the mini-budget as cat-handed, careless and unconservative. It
was rushed, looking back, and we should have had a more methodical and careful approach. And I've said that repeatedly.
Yeah, you have.
Because I
acknowledge
think,
that.
and the one thing that I hate is when leaders don't take responsibility for the things they're in charge of. Now, that doesn't mean they're responsible for everything, and I think there were lots of other things going on, but we could have taken a slightly more a cautious approach.
How does it make you feel, though, when you see a Conservative leadership race that's, I guess, people are kind of trashing?
Well, it's up to them. I mean, I'm out of Parliament. I'm still very engaged with politics. I love coming on shows. I love discussing the issues. But they've got to do their thing. And they've got to try and win votes. And that's what they're doing, and they're debating. And I think it's fair for them to look at what's gone wrong with the Conservative government. The mini-budget may be part of that. There were other things as well. And they're contesting to be leaders of the party. So, of course, they've got to have an analysis of what went wrong. I'm not part of that. I'm moving on with my life. I like commenting on it. I love looking at it, but it's not the primary focus of my life at the moment. For the leaders, the leadership candidates, they've got to show that they've understood where we went wrong, and they've got to show, how we can improve and how the party can come together and actually be a good opposition to the Labour government.
And who do you think's had the most, I guess, compelling arguments so far?
I think there are two outstanding candidates so far. I think Kemi Badenoch, rather I should say Kemi Badenoch, I discovered that's how one should pronounce her name. But she's had a good campaign, and she finished strongly, I think, in the last round. And clearly, I think the person who a year ago nobody thought was a contender is Robert Jenrick. He's won the first two rounds quite convincingly. It's quite alarming to see how low these numbers are. I mean, I think he won the last round with 33 MPs.
Yeah, it's a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, and I remember in 2019 it was. I think Boris Johnson got 114 in the first round. So
he described your mini-budget as cat-handed, Robert Jenrick.
Well, I mean, that's up to him. That's very much his view. And actually, I was only there for 38 days, so he's probably saying that the view of a lot of people and what the markets thought. And that's his prerogative. If he thinks he can win that way, which is clearly, he's trying to appeal to the base, and a lot of them, funnily enough, the base liked a lot of what we were trying to do. And as we see coming into the budget, Labour are going to put up taxes, and it's not clear to me that they're ever going to come down anytime soon. That's I mean, if Robert wants to call it cat-handed, that's up to him.
Who would you vote for then, Robert or Kemi?
I think they're both very strong candidates. I haven't decided which of the two I would vote for, but I've been very clear from the start that I thought they were the best. Those were the two best candidates. That's not to denigrate or to diminish what Tom Tugendhat's doing. He's a very good minister, a very capable, friendly person as well. I've known him for many years, as well as James Cleverly. But it seems to me, in terms of making the argument to be leader, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch are the outstanding candidates.
Can I ask you about the row that we've been talking about today, Keir Starmer's gifts and hospitality? Is it a big deal? Some people might be thinking, who cares? It's not taxpayers' money. He's declared it in the usual way.
I've been slightly baffled by it because I know Keir Starmer a bit, and he was the shadow Brexit secretary when I was the junior minister in the department. So we used to see each other, every time we had departmental questions, and I had a respect for him. But the suits, I find totally baffling. I mean, when was the last time anyone bought you a suit? And actually, in his position, you would think he would reimburse the person for buying. I don't know how much these suits cost. I mean, one assumes quite a lot of money. But he's not a poor man. He gets a decent salary. He earns, as I understand it, money on top of the fact that as leader of the opposition salary, he earned something like £400,000. It's been reported last year. So he can clearly afford to buy himself a decent suit.
You must have accepted his hospitality and stuff when you were...
So that's why I draw a distinction between the football, where, as a minister, you go to games, you might go to concerts, which are paid for, and you declare, which he did in that way. But, bits of clothing, dresses, glasses, I mean, that all seems very odd to me. And I'm surprised that he didn't reimburse the people who bought him those things.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Kwasi Kwarteng. Good to have you on the programme this evening. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we will get reaction to all of that from our panel. Plus, hit by political setbacks and scandal, the DUP meet for their conference. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins sits down with their leader. Welcome back. Well, before the break, we were talking about the economy and, of course, the mini-budget with the former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. Let's bring in Josh and Gutto, shall we? The economy. I mean, look, we've been talking about all sorts of things today, but really the economy is the big challenge for Labour, isn't it? How do you think they're doing?
Well, I think the decision today on interest rates, was a reflection of the fact that they haven't yet come down to 2%, as we saw. I think, I have to make this point. Kwasi's moved on with his life and he's doing new things, and that's great. But, the people paying higher mortgages as a consequence of the car crash mini-budget that he oversaw have not moved on with their lives. And those who are now coming off their 2-year fixed-rate mortgage or their 5-year fixed-rate mortgage are now seeing their mortgages go massively up. And that is, the direct consequence of the choices that he made. And it's sort of easy to say, well, it was a bit rushed, it was a bit too quick, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line is you were responsible for that budget, and that budget sent mortgages soaring. And I think it will take time for those interest rates to come down and for the Bank of England to get control over inflation.
I don't blame you for saying that, but there's a limited period of time when that is the answer. And I admire Josh for setting up a growth group, because driving economic growth is the ultimate answer. And I have some sympathy for what Kwasi was saying, was that what they were trying to do, they messed it up horrendously, but having the ambition of doing what it takes to drive growth is a noble ambition. Nobody supports what they did to the economy, but driving growth should be paramount, because without growth, there are no jobs. There's no money to improve public services. And so far, what concerns me, and I generally think that your Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is bold and brave and, has got off to a good start. But a lot of the measures that are about to be brought in on workers' rights and stuff are going to achieve the exact opposite of driving growth. They're going to make it really hard to grow the economy. They're going to make it really hard for people to set up businesses or grow their businesses. And so there's a double speak going on, which is a big problem, I think.
I mean, it does feel that there's, I guess, two things slightly in tension at the minute with the desire to promote growth and then obviously the desire to...
please the unions.
That wasn't what I was going to say. Hang on, stop it. The desire to try and get the public spending under control, right? So, to be responsible with the economy, there's been some infrastructure spending, for example, that's been cut. I mean, that's a hard balancing act, right?
But it's not a balancing act. You have to do the public finances in order to get the growth. And that is the lesson of the Liz Truss mini-budget. If you don't demonstrate that you are a fiscally responsible government who understands public finances and that you're going to get them under control, you are not going to get investment, you are not going to win the trust of markets.
But that's not what every economist says. If you spoke to Andy Haldane, for example, who says that actually, capital spending, which is not what the issue with Liz Truss was, that was, tax cuts for the wealthy, capital spending is something that they should, not flex the fiscal rules over.
And I hope that over the course of this Parliament, you will see more capital spending. I think it's really important. And I think what you've seen at the moment is laying the groundwork for investment. We've got a huge investment summit being held on the 14th of October in London that investors from all over the world are coming into, which Rachel Reeves is speaking at. That is all about investment and capital investment. And the setting up of GB Energy and the planning reforms that we've started to push through Parliament, those are all about basically saying, look, investment needs a set of things for it to actually work. It needs a vehicle and it needs the right planning environment so that what you invest in isn't then obstructed by, blockers. And that's exactly what you've started to see the government do. So, over the course of this Parliament, we will see investment and we do need investment. And it is at the core of Labour's argument that investment is the key to growth.
What do you feel when you hear Kwasi Kwarteng? Do you blame him and Liz Truss for the reputation of the Conservative Party now?
It's sort of 38 days that the party could have done without. And actually, a lot of people now look back and think, why did they topple not only the most electorally successful leader, the Conservative Party has had in 40 years, but a guy who did have big ambitions for infrastructure in the UK.
You talk about Boris Johnson.
Yeah, he did. And so without revisiting that, I do think the important thing now is to sort of join the dots. And there's a big talk on growing the economy and on balancing the books and all that. But when you give 22% pay rises and 15% pay rises, regardless of who they go to, which is even more controversial, that is not helping bring inflation down. And that makes it harder for the Bank of England to bring our mortgage rates down.
We're out of time. I know you want to come in, but I'm sorry, Josh. We are out of time. Now, it is a tough time for the Democratic Unionist Party as they prepare for their annual conference. Now, they no longer hold the First Minister's office. Their former leader's been charged with historical sex offences and they lost 3 seats in the general election. Their leader, Gavin Robinson, has been speaking to our senior Ireland correspondent, David Bevins.
Gavin Robinson, DUP leaders have a reputation for saying no, 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 well, maybe. Are you different?
No. No, DUP leaders have a reputation for serving their community, serving their constituents, not being afraid of saying difficult things at difficult times, standing their ground to make sure they can deliver for the people they have had and the people I have the privilege of representing.
But you are different in that you are the first unionist leader under the age of 40. What brings a man of your age into the business of politics, and particularly the binary politics of unionism versus nationalism in Northern Ireland?
I suppose I'm sorry to say that I'll only be able to claim that for a couple of months, and then that will elude me too. And yeah, a bit younger, than others, but I've been part of this party for the last 20 years. I've been a part of this community for the last 40 years, so having been politicised at a young age just because of the environment in which I grew up and the set-piece negotiations and agreements that were reached throughout my teenage and adult life, that got me interested in politics, but loving my community, loving this space in East Belfast and the people that live around me, my neighbours, projected me into getting involved and making sure that where I have a contribution to make, I make it.
The party that you refer to has had a busy year and a difficult year. It began with the restoration of power sharing, but the Brexit border in the Irish Sea still exists. So what did 2 years of boycotting Stormont actually achieve, Gavin?
We've been able not only to highlight some of the problems but get solutions, and I think I've been very open that where we reached in safeguarding the union was an important milestone, but it certainly didn't solve all of the problems, and nor do we take our eye off those problems. But 3 considerations: could we have got more out of that at that time out of the current Conservative government? And the answer we concluded after 2 years of negotiations was that we'd brought it as far as we could. If we held out and we'd waited longer and saw the incoming Labour government, would we have got more? And I think the conclusion of I and my colleagues was no, we wouldn't have achieved what we had achieved at that time. And then thirdly, and importantly for us, when we're privileged to represent people in Northern Ireland, and the modus operandi of unionists more generally is to make Northern Ireland work, our own actions were causing harm in that regard. We weren't able to deliver for the everyday needs of the people that we represent in Northern Ireland, and I was pleased to see a return to devolution.
But that restoration of devolution saw the election of the first nationalist First Minister, Michelle O'Neill. Sinn Féin's the largest party at Stormont, holds most Northern Ireland seats at Westminster now. Does the DUP have its head in the sand about the direction of travel in terms of Irish unity?
So we're Democrats, we recognise the outcome of the election. In fact, we were accused of keeping devolution down because we didn't want to see a First Minister, and remind people day and daily that the office of First and Deputy First Minister, the executive office, is co-joined. It is equal. But the reason why you have a nationalist First Minister is because of the divisions and splits within wider unionism. So that's not for the general public to be overly concerned about, or people from afar across the United Kingdom or in the Republic of Ireland to be concerned about. But for me, as somebody who is interested in the unique relationship we have between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and to promote the values that bind us together within that union, it's a concern for me. It is wrong to conclude that there has been a large-scale change of constitutional outlook within Northern Ireland, but there has been demographic change between political parties, so we can see that. But back in 1998, the total vote of those voting for nationalist parties has not changed one bit today. It still rests as it did then, 39 and 40%. So no large-scale change, but a reconfiguration of the strength within those blocks. And so not concerned, but no head in the sand. I have a big job of work to do, and as we gather this weekend at our party conference, galvanising my colleagues and supporters and activists within the party, but more importantly, those within our country who recognise just how important it is that Northern Ireland has a powerful part to play within the United Kingdom and benefits greatly from it, that we can maximise that and energise people to see those unique benefits over the course of the next 2.5 years.
And that party conference, as I say, comes at the end of a difficult year for the party. How does a party begin to recover from the fact that a former leader is awaiting trial on historical sex offences?
I remember talking to you that day on Good Friday, and people have commented often about just how visibly shocked we all were at that time and how difficult it has been. But look, over the course of the last number of months, and despite a general election thrown into the mix, I've been incredibly proud of the support that I've received, but more importantly, sometimes it takes a shock to recognise what's important. And colleagues are pulling together, drawing together. So I don't think you will find a conference of deflated colleagues, far from it. I think you will see a sense of renewal and a sense of revival amongst my colleagues and the job of work it is we have to do. And in the last number of weeks and months, I've been going around Northern Ireland. I've been talking to colleagues and people in communities right throughout this province, making sure not only that we serve people well, but we reflect their aspirations and their desires for the Northern Ireland that we will build in the future.
The DUP had a very close relationship with the Tory government for a time. That Tory government was accused by others of playing fast and loose with peace. How do you think the Labour government's doing in terms of Northern Ireland?
We've always had a history of working with whoever is in power at Westminster, and we've always had the role of providing opposition in Westminster when it's appropriate. And look, I think, Labour have achieved a significant and monumental supermajority, as it has been called. They have the numbers in Westminster. With strength of numbers comes a great responsibility, not just power to do that which they wish, but to recognise, as previous Labour governments did, that particularly when it comes to Northern Ireland, there is a sense that this place needs to be carefully nurtured. And that means that often, even in the most mundane decisions that need to be taken, they need to be approached carefully, they need to be approached sensitively, and there are nuances that, if to the uninitiated, may seem odd, but if you don't get them right, things can go wrong. So there's a steep learning curve for this Labour government, but we will work with them as we have done over the last couple of months and continue to do so, I hope so, productively in the future.
Gavin Robinson, thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Politics Hub. As the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff creates controversy, what happens when the backroom boys and girls are catapulted onto the front pages?
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the prison service in crisis. We have an exclusive insight into what life is really like inside, hearing from a serving prison governor at one of the country's overcrowded prisons. Plus, one of Britain's most prolific shoplifters is now banned from nearly every shop in the North East. We'll speak to the shopkeepers who have lost tens of thousands of pounds to thieves within the last year. And the museum slaying its Gen Z makeover. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
I'm Mark Stone, I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, DC. And beyond the United States, from across the world, I report on the biggest stories.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's Chief Correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland correspondent. I remember some of the worst of the violence here.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's Special Correspondent based in Istanbul.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong, and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. It takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
Either way, he's a Boris Johnson, just for the record, would say he's not a
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, there's an old saying in politics that when the advisor becomes a story, then their boss has a problem. And the prominence of the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff in today's newspapers suggests that it might be getting to that point for Keir Starmer. But of course, Sue Gray is hardly the first senior advisor to be dragged out of the shadows and into the political limelight. How many of these do you remember?
Oh, make me over. I'm all I wanna be. A walking study in demonology. Hey, so glad you could make it. Yeah, now you really made it. Hey, so glad you could make it
Great song, I have to say. I love that song. I also have to say, as a kind of political nerd, I kind of love an advisor story as well. It was, I mean, what were you had a couple of run-ins, didn't you?
I think day one was kind of lively because I just thought it'd be nice to take something in, and I bought a whole load of stuff in Tesco. And then I realised the cameras were there, and I tried to leave it with the cops, and they said they'd blow it up. So I actually had to walk the walk of shame with 2 Tesco bags full of mineral water and snacks.
Yeah, mineral water. We get the point that Guto was trying to make. Obviously, he was coming in after Partygate when there was kind of, what was it, suitcases of wine being taken.
Do you know what? It
to
changed the
protest,
it changed the narrative. You've got to own your moments.
Yeah, you did make
there was a reason for
a few lines there, definitely. A few lines. I mean, it is a big thing, isn't it? As soon as the political advisors start becoming the story, then it's a problem.
It seems like it's gradually become more of a thing in politics over the last 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, I can't really remember politics before that. I was too young. But, you know, every year that goes by, the stories about advisors seem to be more common. I think they become targets for frustration at the politics of whatever's going on. And, you know, every now and again, I feel a little bit sorry for some of them.
You are the target because it's easier to blame the chief of staff or the director of comms than the principal. You take on the principal and you're taking on the person with the real power to fire you. So it's, you sign up for that and you expect it. But Sue Gray, if you forgive an appalling sort of analogy, has become Technicolor, and she's meant to be grey. Yeah, she's up there now in bright, lurid lights, isn't she? And that's not a great place for her to be. And she's not a former journalist or a former broadcaster who journalists would recognise before, which is true of a lot of us who've been directors of comms. But she was meant to be a nobody. And now she is, you know, everybody in the UK knows that she's paid more than the Prime Minister and are wondering why.
I mean, I guess sometimes it is true, though, isn't it, that bad premierships blame the comms director. I remember, you know, we've seen it so many times before, haven't we, where it's a communications problem. It's not my policies. They were excellent, very, very good, of course. Thanks both very much for a very lively programme, as always, Guto and Josh there. Well, that is it from us tonight. We, of course, will see you next week at the Labour Party conference. Up next, though, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. I'll see you on Monday in Liverpool from the Labour Party conference. In the meantime, have a great Friday and a great weekend as well.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.